budget overview and assembly amendments. We can do a roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Allard. Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdilla.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Okay. Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
And let me try Ms. Allard. I do not see Ms. Allard in the attendee queue, but everybody else is here.
Okay, thank you. So for this meeting, we are going to start off with doing a broader conversation, having a broader conversation to get a better understanding of first quarter budget and its adjustments sort of generally and as related to COVID-19. I think there's some specific things that Mr. Wilbur will bring up, and I know some of the members have questions on this as well, and then we'll go into amendments. I actually don't know, and maybe Desiree, you can answer this question, if we have any formal amendments to discuss at this time, but if we don't, if members have some informal amendments that they are considering, we can have that discussion as well.
Mr. Chair, I have 2 amendments drafted. I emailed them out to the members, oh gosh, maybe around 11:45 or so, and they are also on the Assembly's items of interest page.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Wilbur.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly. I think what we would do is just remind the Assembly where we left off at our administration's presentation, an overview of the budget last week. We talked about how we built this budget with the revenues that we had solid projections for, the expenses that we knew that we were going to incur. And then we ended the work session with some sharing information that while we built the 2020 first quarter budget revisions, there was a lot of unknowns as to the expenses that we may incur and have incurred, mostly the ones that we will incur related to things that are COVID-19. But we also shared that there's a lot of opportunity for reimbursement that is coming to the municipality. And as I mentioned, it's really going to be looking at 3 areas. The CARES Act has multiple appropriations into several federal agencies. There is also recovery dollars inside FEMA. In addition to the CARES Act giving money to federal agencies like the Department of Transportation, Health and Human Services, Department of Commerce, Treasury, and a variety of others, they've also provided money to states. And the state of Alaska, their allocation is $1.25 billion, and of that, there's a split between how much of those dollars will be maintained by the state, and then there is a portion, I believe about 45% of the 1.25 billion, which is roughly $562 million, that the state is to allocate to local communities. So since we'd last talked, the state of Alaska had not received that 1.25, and the governor hadn't made any decisions about or recommendations on about how that allocation would occur but since last Friday, we've learned a little bit more about the eligibility and the opportunities inside the CARES Act with departments, federal agencies. We've also recently learned this week that the governor is proposing that the proportional share, or a share, not a proportional share, but a share of the state money going to Anchorage is at $156 million. Again, the budget that we have built and the budget that we have proposed and the budget that we're going to share with you on Tuesday night does not include any of those additional resources inside our budget. We know that those opportunities are coming. As they arrive and decisions are made as to what level it will be, we will have to appropriate those dollars and either we will identify what their intended purposes are for expense recovery for a particular program or a particular department or a particular investment. We'll also, and there may be opportunities where we have a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity on how we can use it for various purposes. And again, much of the guidance has not been written at a federal level from departments. At a state level, I think the flexibility is pretty generous at this point. At least that's what we understand. And then as those dollars come in, we will have to appropriate those dollars with the Assembly. And again, we are relatively assured, if not confident, that there is some portion of the amount of CARES Act that will be coming to Anchorage will be available for recovery of lost revenues. And as I mentioned last week, the ability to do that is on our side, it's at least my understanding is if we have had traditional revenue sources from a particular source, whether let's just say it's the room tax, we have that budgeted into our budget based on a projection from anticipated visitor receipts and bed tax. We do that projection with historical receipts. Obviously, the COVID-19 is going to influence that amount of revenue coming in with the number that we had budgeted, and then the knowledge that that number could be influenced and likely will be influenced as a result of COVID-19. Those lost revenues as a result of that process, we do believe that those lost revenues will be able to be reimbursed. So it'll be a one-for-one in that revenue recovery that we otherwise didn't have. Again, we don't know what the amount of lost revenues might be. So the amount of recovery in which we would be asking for, we wouldn't know that right now. So basically in the last 7 days, there's been a lot of new information, and I anticipate in the next 7 days and the next month, and probably for a good portion of the next quarter, we're going to be getting new information. We're asking our congressional delegation, we are asking federal departments, and we are working with the state to get more clarity on exactly what as COVID dollars can be used for. So I do think that the budget that the administration's got proposed it's solid and balanced based on the information that we have. We also know that we are going to have to make some adjustments through the year as we are recovering from our expenses. We are seeking reimbursement. As I also mentioned, we are still seeking reimbursement from FEMA for the earthquake. Those dollars to continue to come in, we will appropriate those and then put those dollars back into our accounts to recover for those expenses that we had related to the earthquake. We anticipate that process will be very similar for COVID-19 as those expenses come in, and then as we request and receive reimbursement for those expenses. So I think that is all I have to share with you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly. If you have particular questions, I will do my best to address those at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And as usual, either request to be put in the queue in the chat or just text me. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. A couple of quick ones. Lance, what was that dollar amount again? 100 million something?
So the state of Alaska had received $1.25 billion, and then the state is to divvy those dollars out to this, half to the state and to us. The portion of those dollars going to local communities, the governor's proposal is, I believe, $156 million. The legislature would still need to act on that dollar amount.
Okay, good. So we have done a couple things to try to help out non-essential businesses that got closed. And one was they can prorate their inventory tax, they can pay a little less if they were closed for some period of time. And then we also delayed filing the inventory tax forms and then delayed payment of property taxes a month. And we didn't delay it very far because we financed that gap with TANs, which Mr. Slivka told us are very hard to move right now. So I wonder if some of this money could be used to cover any costs of a payment plan for property taxes. Some businesses they're hammered right now, but they're going to really get hammered like a tourist season and so on. And I think we'll have a real problem paying their property taxes. And if we gave a 6-month plan or something, I don't know what it would be. There's some cost to us because we won't have the money. We'll have to borrow or maybe use some of this to tide us over until we get that money. So have you looked at that as a possible use?
Through the chair, Mr. Weddleton, I have not. I know that there may be opportunities there. I'm not saying that we couldn't do it. I just don't know if we can do it, and I have not looked into it.
So just if I could have followed, so to kind of initiate the possibility of that, is that something that would be in a budget amendment, or is that a separate operation?
I don't think it would be included as part of this budget amendment because I don't believe that we will have an answer by Tuesday. But if we do have the ability to adjust in a timely fashion, I definitely think that the administration would be supportive of that. Our challenge is this. Our challenge is following the Tuesday night meeting, one of the things that you will be doing is setting the mill levies. And possibly the delay of the receipt of property taxes. Obviously, we are going to be covering that delay through our own dollars, and maybe some of these resources from the state can offset our cost of carrying those dollars. But whether or not part of that money from the state can supplement or replace the property tax dollars, I do not know if that's possible.
Right. I wasn't looking for that so much. I was looking for more like a payment plan. So, those property taxes are still owed, but instead of being paid, by August or whatever the second payment is due, it would be, extended 6 months or something like that. And I know we have carrying costs, but, that's what I would be looking for more, not actually, well, I appreciate that. So we'll add it to your list.
Okay. I think what we'll do is we'll visit with Treasury to see if, how that might affect their billing processes and receipt processes, but it's a good question. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you. And just before I go on to the queue, just to help guide this discussion a little bit, I realize that it might be difficult to sort of separate in totality the 156 million versus the question that we had before us on Tuesday. But the members should have received an invite for a Budget and Finance Committee meeting where I believe it is the intent of the chair of that committee, Ms. LaFrance, to begin having the discussion of what we can or should do with the 156 million as projected to come from the state to the municipality. Mr. Constant?
I would just take myself out of the queue.
Okay. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I probably have questions too that might be better for the committee meeting, but one of the things that I think is specific is what we raised in regard to the mill rate. And I guess my question to Lance or Alex or whoever, is it possible, is it potentially even foreseeable that we could keep the tax mill rate at the 2019 numbers and then fill those lost revenues with CARES funding? So essentially we would not have to send out a tax levy bill that shows that an increase is being demanded of the taxpayers?
This is Alex Slivka through the chair. So a few things. One, I'll highlight that Jason Buckenstead, Chief of Staff, is point person on discussions with the state in regard to the 156 million and when it shows up and what we could do with that. I think many people should remember that part of the governor's budget veto logic was that possibly some of this money might be used for school bond debt reimbursement, but those are many issues, and Jason is working with the governor and his team to both get those answered. The broader question that I'll remind what I've shared in the past is that we're going to propose a mill rate, and the process that we're going through on this budget is to do what we've agreed to via code, which is replenish our fund balance, which we ended 2019 with over a $4 million deficit. So we need to tax to recover that. What I think Lance has said and what the administration is trying to propose is we're going to have some money. We don't know, and we won't know by Tuesday how we can use that money. And so our best path forward is to act as if we are going to get all the revenue that's in the budget, even though we know there's going to be a significant gap due to hotel, motel, and other things, and that we proceed on that fashion. And then when we know with certainty how much we're going to get and what we can do with that money, I think then it would be more reasonable to look at coming back to the Assembly with some sort of budget amendment. But we really are driven by our timeline to get the budget passed and set the mill rate and send out the notices, and then deal with certainty when we know it relative to the funding.
Well, thank you, Mr. Slivka. I appreciate that. But if I could continue on a thought or two on that, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. For me, I'm looking at this from a very different perspective, I think, than what the municipality is. And I know from comments that I received on some questions yesterday that the approach has been to manage the budget to tax to the tax cap. And that's the statement that I got back. And that really causes me grave concern, considering the reality of what I think our economic health is. And I've said this before, that my thought would be that one of the things we need to do is stop creating more fear and frustration and do the things that we think we can do to help people not only recover from this economic catastrophe, but to also help them understand that we get it, that we're not going to do the things that we think we normally do because everything is normal, because it is not. And so I'm telling you my frustration in some of this, in that I feel like we get answers like, well, this is how we do it. We're not getting answers about, well, this is what we could do, or we could be creative in such a way to try to help alleviate some of these pressures that we know are out there and exist. And so I'm kind of frustrated by the fact that we just seem to be building this budget based on what we've always done for the last 45 years. And I don't think that's really relevant to the time that we're in. And it really causes me great concern in terms of the message that we're really sending to the public. What we're doing is we're saying, well, yeah, we kind of know you're in a situation, but this is how we do things. So we're going to press on in the way that we think everything is going to be normal at some point. And we don't know that. So I'm desperately asking the administration to help figure out how we do something with this budget that doesn't add another layer of frustration and angst on people that we know exists. So how do we do that as creatively as possible, considering all the options that really are out there and the potential that looks fairly promising in terms of funding that will help us out. So anyway, I'll just make that statement and hope that that resonates somewhere. Thanks.
Thank you. Does the administration want to respond?
Well, I'll start, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate Assembly Members Kennedy's comments, and I do think the administration is taking as many steps as we know that we can that balance carrying on, and caring for what this community is facing right now. And at the same time, trying to make sure that when we get out of this, and we will get out of this, that we have a community and an economy that we can, continue to press on rather than from a slowing down or a stop. The comment about the tax cap is, I think there were, the ability to adjust or to tax to the cap. Just remind the Assembly that the tax cap was generated and it's influenced basically by three primary things. If population goes down or up, if CPI goes down or up, if new construction goes down or up, maybe some settlements, and we use a 5-year trailing average to generate that number. And that number for the taxes that are in the tax cap, at least the property taxes, and remember, property taxes and other taxes that could influence property taxes are, at least for the property piece, it's about 56% of our total resources that coming in. And the tax cap itself, whatever that amount is, that is the base we use when we create 2021 and then in the future. So I understand, appreciate, and trying to figure out solutions to, I think, Miss Kennedy's perspective on this, and at the same time making sure that we have a budget that is defensible, something that we can use and carry forward when we get out of this process. So it's not without care or concern that we've made some of our choices. So I appreciate and respect Ms. Kennedy's positions and her comments. I really do.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I do have another question, but I'll stay in the queue if you want me to, either way.
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple other people, so I will put you back in the queue, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a comment and then a question. The comment was spurred by the conversation that just happened. I remember when Mr. Weddleton and I were running for the Assembly the first time in 2016, there was a proposition put on the ballot called Prop 8, and it sort of monkeyed with the traditional understanding of the tax cap, and it made it so you couldn't do sort of temporary alleviation of the tax cap without causing significant layoffs in the future. And so ironically, it turned the tax cap into more of a ratchet. And that's what we said at the time. It's why I opposed it. But I think it's precisely why we can't do some of the creative things that Ms. Kennedy is hoping for. Maybe we'll find a way to use that $156 million. But in terms of the tax cap and the traditional property taxes, Proposition 8 was a mistake. And we said it at the time, and unfortunately it passed. Talking about my question, though, I wanted to get back to the administration about the, and I know you already explained this, but I'd like some more clarity, and just walk me through it again about the bed tax and other sorts of taxes that we know we're not going to be receiving. How is that going to be backfilled exactly? Because is it through the CARES Act? Or is it through a different mechanism? And I know if it's the CARES Act, it's not that $156 million. It's a different pot of money. So could you, again, just please walk me through how that backfilling of those revenues will happen?
So I'll start, and then I'll ask Mr. Bockenstead to add on. So the Assemblymember Dunbar, through the chair, the mechanism, or I think I explained the mechanism on how we would receive that is we will have to show and prove in our request that first, the amount of lost revenue, the bed tax, for example, was as a result of COVID-19. The second part will be how much is it and how do you know that? So if we say that it's going to be $2 million and it turns out we're asking for much more than that, we will likely get challenged, or at least have to prove that the amount of dollars that we're asking for are based on the budgeted anticipation, and that the revenues are actually lost because of COVID-19. In this case, I don't think that's going to be a hard case to make because the bed tax is largely influenced by visitors and tourists, and their, COVID-19 is restricting travel and their ability to show up. And it's not going to be a hard case for us to do that. And pretty much any community that's based on, or state that's based heavily on tourism, will be able to do that. So that is the mechanism in which we will show our eligibility and express the amount in which we've lost. The department, the state agency, or whether it's state funds that we tap in to do both of those, there may be opportunity in both. There may be an opportunity to recover some of those lost revenues from the state funds that we would receive, but there also may be an opportunity to receive some lost revenue, depending on the rules of the CARES Act, for money that was given to the Department of Treasury or the Department of Commerce. So I'm not sure I have a clear answer to the second part, but we have, I think, a pretty good understanding of how we prove it. It's just who are we proving it to is the part that I'm not 100% clear on just yet. And frankly, if we have options in all three of those areas, maybe Treasury, Commerce, and the state, but we have some other expenses that can only be recovered by the state, then we will, look to those resources and then go to the other two to recover the lost revenue.
Can I ask a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So I was going to ask you that, which you just said you don't know, which is who do we prove it to? When you say Commerce and Treasury, do you mean federal?
US. Yes, federal.
Okay, and can we go directly to them, or do we have to go through the state?
In some case, for those two, for Treasury and for Commerce, I'm not sure. I know that there are some agencies, federal agencies, they're going straight to us, and mostly in Department of Transportation, and they're not going through the state. So it depends.
And the backfilling, it's through the, again, I'm sorry to be so specific, it's through the CARES Act specifically, or is there another federal act?
It would be through the CARES Act, because those federal dollars that are used to support this through the CARES Act, individual federal agencies received a portion of the CARES Act funds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Mr. Chair, this is Jason Bachenstedt. Can I just add a little clarification onto that? Mr. Wilbur got it mostly right, that there are many different potential buckets. And as I think many individuals in Anchorage and around the state have seen, some of those are already being announced. For example, the potential Merrill-Field money and others. I would be very cautious, though, about continuing to talk about the $156 million right now. As I think Mr. Wilbur mentioned earlier, this is a proposal from the governor, and we have no idea what type of strings might be attached with that. So until we have a better sense of what that is, and obviously there is going to be a very vigorous debate in the state legislature about that, I think it's going to be a little premature for us to fully know where all of those funds can be used. Now, I will say that in our conversations with folks on the federal delegation and within the state, we are certainly very hopeful that as we get through this process, either some portion of whatever we receive from the $1.25 billion, which is where the governor is proposing the $156 million coming from, we can use some of that to make sure that our budget is balanced. But there will be plenty of other opportunities as well with some of the other grant funds that are going to be coming in from other areas that will be able to also allow us to do that. So it will be a mixture, but we will continue to learn more, over the coming weeks and probably the next month or two.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. What I haven't heard spoken about here, but in relationship to the example that was used, school bond debt reimbursement, I will fight tooth and nail to resist any appropriations of COVID response monies that would be directed for extraordinarily obtuse expenses, meaning expenses that weren't caused by COVID, but were caused by a political decision. Long before COVID erupted, where there was a veto and then the legislature put them back in, and then there's another veto. It to me is a shell game to suggest that we would use funds meant for relief for people who are suffering to take care of a political problem or a political decision made by another political entity that was levied on us. And so I appreciate the desire to figure out ways to make relief occur, but I want us to, and I will fight for us to make sure that any relief that occurs is actually tied to damages caused by the pandemic and not by bad policy.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, first of all, I'm not going to argue about politics on anything. I'm going to look at what's impacting our taxpayers and the people that live in this community. And if we have a discussion about how to pay off the school's bonded indebtedness, that impacts all of us, then it's not a political decision to me. It's one that comes out of the pocketbooks of every person who's paying their taxes in this community. So I hope we have good conversations about how to alleviate that burden. But I do have a couple of questions. One is, I certainly understand the workings of the tax cap. I know what the initiative did, but I will say that all that did, the tax cap, all it does is tell you to what extent you can add or increase your taxes. It does not say you have to build a budget that allows you to tax to that cap. And so I'm still frustrated by whether or not we could just try to stay at that 2019 level and then backfill or actually amend our budget as we see money come in that would actually could go to some of those things that we might essentially be cutting at this moment. So I'm really still looking for just an answer as to whether or not we can maintain a 2019 tax levy number and then amend the budget and add those additional funds as they come in that would potentially fill what we would otherwise be able to tax for at the 2020 tax cap allowed number. Does that make sense? I mean, did I ask that question correctly, or should I look for another way to say it? But again, I'm trying to figure out how we don't terrify the people with a new green card that says this is, or whatever color it is, this is how much you're going to pay in extra taxes this year, even though we know that that you don't have the income that you did at this time last year.
Thanks. So
Chair.
someone from the admin. Oh, who is that?
This is Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development.
Go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you, Assemblymember Kennedy. I can certainly appreciate your viewpoint. It's one that we hear as well. I think at this time, the safer approach would be to look at that question through a different lens. In other words, is our ability to artificially reduce tax rates and use money from the federal government to make up that missing revenue at a later date? I will be honest with you, we don't know the answer to that yet, but without understanding the various buckets of money coming through the Stimulus Act, CARES and otherwise, and whether or not they will allow you to backfill revenue that's lost through deliberate action is not settled yet. So the way that the CARES Act reads now, it is for expenses not budgeted. If we are artificially saying we're going to lower our revenue and try and use CARES Act monies to backfill that revenue, I would be cautious without confirmation from preferably Treasury at the federal level that would be an allowable expense before we committed to that. But it is something that is worth asking, and a question that I'm personally interested in as well, because it does have implications for ways in which the municipality could be creative with that CARES Act money. But as of today, from the little guidance that has come out of Treasury, I would be extremely cautious in taking that approach until we could get a stronger answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy, you had a follow-up?
No, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Schutte.
Thank you. Ms. Solotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to kind of bring this conversation like higher, like 50,000 foot view, because this is going to be a really complex subject we need to communicate with the public. So I'd like to hear from maybe the administration and then members as we have this discussion on kind of what's the, I don't know, this is borrowing from the mayor, but like a value statement, like what are we trying to achieve with the CARES Act funding? I think that is really important for us to frame this conversation. We kind of dove a little bit into the details, whereas if we have this higher level conversation, it may have us asking the right kinds of questions of the administration to get at what areas they really find are important and prioritizing. What we don't know, I think particularly, the discussion around the bed tax illustrates that there may be some things that we are really fundamental that we don't know that we're gonna have to tell the public we're waiting to learn about, but also then helps us go to the public and seeing if our values and our priorities and intentions align with what their needs and their concerns are. So I'd like to have that conversation if we could. I don't know if we need to have it now or if we can have it in the near future as we get more information. But I think that that's really a fundamental discussion we need to have as we consider how we want to move forward with this funding. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if the administration wants to share their initial thoughts on that, but I do agree and hope that we can have these conversations on a higher level in the very near future, whether that's beginning in the Budget and Finance Committee and then going on from there. But I don't know if the administration wants to share any initial thoughts.
Mr. Chair, if I may too, I want to toss out, since we're not having community councils as well, I really want us to think about how we're going to elucidate input or get input. Because if we were to take a proposal to a lot of our community councils or say, hey, this is what the administration is thinking about this, at least yours and mine that we go to, Mr. Chair, I know we would get lots of responses. So we need to figure out a way that we can start to take that information out to those groups and others to get the feedback that I hope all desire. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll just add on community councils that many of them actually are going to be, if not all of them, are going to be meeting likely in May, if not also in June, to put together their CIP, CIB plans for OMB to consider. And so that is something that they're going to be ramping up quickly. Okay, but turning back to the administration, any thoughts before I move on?
Mr. Chair, this is Chris. I would just echo your statement about utilizing the Budget Committee as a great place to start that dialogue. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, this is Jason. I would just echo what Mr. Schutte said, that we are absolutely willing to have that conversation. And I think it will probably be somewhat abstract for a little while, but as we move forward and get more details on where all of the funding is coming from and what the allowable uses are, we're willing and able to have that conversation.
Thanks. Moving on, Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. So yeah, moving on a bit, I suppose. So I was thinking about the convention center and the bed tax and so on, and I've been reading emails super fast these days, and I thought I saw Julie Sape say she expects an 80% reduction in the bed tax revenues for Visit Anchorage, which means that would be the same for our 4% for denying the center. So, if we are coming up, I'm looking, we get like $15 million this year. What if we only have, 3 million or so? What happens to, what happens? We won't be paying off the debt on that property. What happens?
This is Alex Slivka through the chair. There is both a debt service reserve as well as a capital reserve that even if we had zero revenue from the convention, the Denina, we have enough money in reserve accounts, which are there for this very specific reason, to be able to make those debt service payments.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very wise.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a quick question, I think. So if we approve this budget with what the administration has proposed, and then we get money to backfill it, could we actually do a tax rebate then, or would we just simply put the excess into fund balance? Thanks.
Through the chair, this is Lance. The Assemblymember Kennedy, I think that we have talked about the mechanism it would take to do a rebate. I'm going to have to defer and touch base with Treasury or ask Alex to help me do that. To do a rebate, we'd also had looked at other in the past of how that might affect next year's tax cap. So I don't have an answer for you, but I know that we've answered this question in the past. I will find out.
Mr. Chair, this is Jason again. One of the things that I just want to mention is one of the largest increase on the mill levy this year is for last year's lack of school bond debt reimbursement from the state. I think it's going to be very difficult, though maybe not impossible, very difficult to somehow say that we could use CARES Act funding for something that we are reimbursing from the previous year. So I would just throw that out there as a comment.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Ms. Kennedy?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. And I think that actually raises an interesting opportunity, although I think some people would think this may never happen. Pigs might fly first. But if we do go down that path where we've made the levy, we get all this relief money, and we have a very substantial fund balance at the end of the year, then what I have seen done in the past is in the next tax year, a certain portion of those excess funds are by ordinance given back as a form of a reduction in the tax levy for the next year. And so it isn't a direct one-to-one, but I have seen that done before.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr.
Chair. This is Lance. I do think that, those, as Assemblymember Constant mentioned, a similar question had been asked in the past, and then the mechanism and how we would do it and the timing is something that we will find out. The one thing I will mention about the bond debt reimbursement, the bond debt reimbursement that we have in on Tuesday night, we're going to set 2 mill levies, one for general government and one for the school district. The one for the school district, it does include bond debt reimbursement for $16 million. If the governor was to suggest that, or the future revenues, the part of the 156 could be used for bond debt reimbursement, if that was something that the administration, the assembly, and was actually eligible to be done, that would affect next year's mill levy. It wouldn't affect anything we do with this year's mill levy for the school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give one more opportunity before we move on to the budget amendments, the 2 that we have before us. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, then let's go ahead and look at the amendments. So we have two, one by Ms. Kennedy and one by Mr. Constant. Ms. Kennedy, you want to walk us through your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recently checked with both of our senior centers, the Anchorage Senior Center and the Chugach Eagle River one. They operate a little bit differently. Knowing what I know about the financial situation of both of them, I will say that the Anchorage one, because they don't have the assisted living component, so they are basically just closed down, and trying to keep some people on staff and figure out how to do what they do. Some of the things they're doing like online, and so they're functioning just fine and don't have any issues with funding, operating capital or operating funds. So, but the Chugach Eagle River Senior Center is a little bit different. They have had struggles over the past year anyway with some of their costs basically being higher than their revenue. And for right now, they're going through their savings. And to make them whole, or at least put them in a better position, is a $23,000 increase to their operating funds. So I throw this out there kind of for conversation. I certainly would like to see them try to maintain as much of their service. And like I said, to a certain extent, because they have the assisted living, they do have some other requirements in terms of maintaining their operations. So, and I put down here that it would come from the health department. So hoping that that could just kind of rearrange a little bit of what's going on or what's already being funded through the health department's budget. And also hoping that some of the FEMA money that has kind of taken over a bit of our health department's operations would help maybe free up some cash in that department so that it would make that $23,000 more available. But I am definitely open to conversation about this. Again, it's the idea of recognizing that that this particular senior center that does house many seniors is having some difficulties. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kennedy, can you tell me a little bit more about the deficit in their operating contract as to why these particular challenges have presented themselves, or what they are, and how they are or are not related to the current state of emergency that we're in? And can you, if you know, tell me what portions of those challenges might be related more to the assisted living portion of the operation versus the recreational portion?
Thank you. And I'm by no means an expert on all the things that they do there, but I will say of the things that I do know, they've had some significant costs due to some of the damage from the earthquake, and some of that was addressed with some FEMA money, and some will be addressed with the recently passed bond. So that's a positive. But recently, they also had they've got a couple of boilers that are really borderline. I think they have 7 boilers, and 2 of them are giving them trouble. So those are kind of like some immediate needs that need to be repaired. And because they don't have the capital budget either, some of those real significant needs like that have to come from some pot of money, and it will probably come from this one or their savings. They also have had some issues in the past with providing a lot of anchor rides that they don't get reimbursed for. They've had a policy of just helping do whatever they need, they believe they're expected to do. So that has caused some shortages. Their Meals on Wheels numbers have dramatically increased because they no longer have the cafeteria open. And the cafeteria was a moneymaker. It was open to the public. So their funds have fallen short from that revenue source. And then in terms of Meals on Wheels, I don't know exactly how all of that is funded. I don't know if that is actually a program or if people pay into that. But they do pay somewhat into the anchor rides. So anyway, there's just kind of a lot of moving parts in that. They have shut down like the beauty shop. They don't have the classes anymore. They're not catering any events that they typically would have. I know the Chamber of Commerce has canceled one event this month, one event last month. So that revenue line has fallen short. So a lot of what they do to try to generate revenues, they typically have bazaars, gun shows, those kinds of community events that are no longer bringing in any money. So they are trying to still function, and even with the assisted living, there are services there that are connected both from the senior center, just the activity part of things, to the actual assisted living. And I think right now their daycare facility is, I don't know that that's operating, so I can't really give you more details on that, but they also run a senior daycare service. So anyway, that's a little bit of it. I'm sorry I can't answer any more specifics than that.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Can you share that second page you showed with us, maybe via email? I don't think I have that, and I would like to have it.
I don't know who shared that. That may be Mr. Schutte on the side doing some of that. But anyway, whoever it is shared that, thanks.
Thank you.
This is Desiree. That was me. I can email that out to members.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Kennedy, this is Lance. Crystal, I'm going to ask Alan over at Maintenance and Operations to reach out to the Senior Center and see if there's something on their capital side that they need immediate attention on, if we can address those with some resources that he might have that might ease some of those concerns. He won't be able to help on their operating side of the house, but we may be able to address some of their capital needs as long as they're maintenance related.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, like I said, the boilers are an issue. So thank you. That'd be great.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kennedy, you might have said this at the beginning, and I apologize if I missed it. Where would the $23,000 come from? I see that it's the operating budget, but what would that otherwise be funding? I just want to be careful about what we're doing to the health department, particularly right now.
Thanks, Austin. And I understand. Yes. The only thing that if you're talking about what it's coming out of from the health department, it's not anything that I specifically targeted. So I don't really have a good answer for that. Like I said, my assumption in this was that because the health department is basically on a little bit of operating in a little bit of a different wavelength in some divisions, that their funding or their costs right now may very well be being covered by FEMA. So I was assuming, and obviously assumptions can be dangerous, but I'm assuming that there could be some freeing up of other funds in that budget that could be allowed for this. And I haven't had the time to track any of that or ask that question. This was just something that I know came to my attention from the Senior Center. They have not received any of the PPP funding. So they are trying to hang on to employees because some of them are basically highly trained for this particular kind of a work environment. And so that $23,000 allows them to kind of do that and to maintain their workforce so that as soon as they can get back open, they can get back open. So anyway, there's just a lot of moving parts in all of that, and I'm probably not answering specifically your question. But again, I'm not the expert on this. I'm just trying to help them figure out how to maintain the services that they are.
Right.
Maintain. Thanks.
Yeah. May I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense to me, Crystal. And I think it sounds like a good idea to ensure that these guys can keep operating. Can we, while we have members of the administration online who are sort of the experts about where money's coming and going, I know we're all a bit in flux, but is there another department? I think Crystal's probably right that, to some extent we're going to get reimbursement that might cover this, and this isn't a huge amount, but I'm even worried about the perception that we're taking from the health department. Is there another department that we know might have extra FEMA funding, or just CARES Act? What do you think about all this?
So, Mr. Chairman, this is Chris Schutte. Just 2 points of clarification first, and then I will address directly your question, Ms. Quinn Davidson. So when it comes to buckets of FEMA money, please remember it's important that at this point, what we're talking about is FEMA reimbursement monies for expenditures directly related to COVID-19 pandemic response. And so the idea of the health department being eligible for FEMA reimbursement, which only reimburses at 75%, it would have to be for expenses that were incurred directly in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, that's not to say that it does not create an opportunity where with the $23,000 within a non-labor budget could not be reallocated differently to help the senior center. But that's not my budget, and I don't know if Lance knows their budget well enough to answer that. But I think the best way to address it is this is something we probably can solve in the existing conditions without a budget amendment. We'd have to just learn more from the senior center about their particular challenges first. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
May I ask, Mr. Schutte, would you be able to work with Ms. Kennedy to figure that out before Tuesday? Because I think it's great that she's bringing this to us, and I think these are the kinds of things that we want to make sure we're taking care of our vulnerable populations. But I just want to make sure that we're not harming the health department at the same time. It's a small amount. I imagine we'd probably be able to find it, but.
Through the chair, I think the short answer is yes. This is the first time I'm seeing it, but I'm sure between Mr. Wilbur, myself, and Ms. Pineda, we can talk about this and figure out how to solve the problem, as well as address the bigger problem about the outstanding earthquake and other capital needs for the facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Any other questions on this amendment? Oh, Ms. Kennedy?
No, once again, I was just saying thank you. Happy to work through this. Like I said, I just kind of threw this out here because I wanted to have this conversation and figure out kind of what we can do to help these folks out. So thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Buckenstead?
Yes, Mr. Chair, because Ms. Kennedy mentioned it about the PPP, I wanted to just throw out there that as of earlier today, the president just signed the new round of stimulus that completely replenishes both the PPP and the EIDL. So I just wanted to alert members to the fact that if you are hearing from people that they're no longer accepting applications because the money's gone, I just am throwing out there that both of those programs have just gotten replenished.
Thank you. Good to know. Okay, seeing no other questions, let's go ahead and move on to the second amendment. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. This one is sponsored actually by myself and Ms. Zalatel, and similar to the last one, it goes to the health department's budget for a shift of funds to Parks and Rec and to OECD. 180,000. It's a lot of money. However, the rationale is that we appropriated roughly 790,000 for emergency mass shelter in November. And that emergency shelter is not being operated because we had to move everybody out of the shelter down to the new shelter. And the new shelter is an exact on-point expense paying for COVID response. And so this sum is 2 months of the operations of that shelter that we had set up the road. And so this 2 months essentially are already in the bank, although we probably have spent them twice. We haven't spent them for the purpose intended because we have an emergency appropriation that is covering the costs of emergency mass shelter at this time. And so those funds are effectively available. And what this would do is drive up the response for abatement, which I was told if you want to get the 3rd Avenue site abated, we need to find at least $50,000. And if you talk about just one place, there are a number of places that are screaming for abatement at this time. I understand that the park staff is just shortly going to, I guess, begin the hiring process and start ramping up abatement sometime in May. But at this point, it's becoming another emergency. The lack of effective response to the problem of the camps in the woods, whether we're talking about 3rd Avenue or up and down the Chester Creek Greenbelt. The other part of the funds would be used for outreach. At this point, there have been strong messages from the administration that they don't think any kind of outreach can actually happen until maybe after the summer. And so there has to be a more creative method to come up with that. And with that, I would like, if possible, Ms. Salatil to comment, because she did much of the heavy lifting on figuring this approach.
Thank you. Ms. Salatil?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Constant. So yes, this 180,000 comes out of the 735,000 we appropriated for May to December emergency shelter. It's anticipated we won't need those 2 of the months as we have the mass shelter stood up in response to the COVID-19 emergency. Mr. Constant is correct there. What the outreach piece here, and I think this has been an elusive part of camp abatement and that process for years, is to take advantage of this opportunity we have with the resource hubs that we have one right now stood up at the mass shelter to support that type of outreach, because as I've spoken with the coalition and with Ms. Burke, getting individuals out into the field to do outreach during the notice period right now is more challenging than ever. It's always been challenging, but it almost is insurmountable right now due to restrictions that a lot of the social service providers have on their staff. So if we can utilize these funds to take advantage of the fact that we currently have adequate shelter for most individuals in camps, get out there, get them to the resource hubs during that notice period, get them acquainted with what the shelter options are, what they're eligible for, and get them hooked into the system when the system is probably more coordinated than it's ever been. It seems like a good opportunity for us to do this and move quickly and really take advantage of and fulfill what we were trying to do with the original appropriation, which is to get as many individuals connected with shelter so they can start laddering out and get connected with services. So I think this is fully within the intent of the original appropriation. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions on this amendment?
I guess, could I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Sure, Ms. Davidson.
I guess it's just sort of the same, well, similar thread. Is this something Parks and Rec and OECD can do? I think it makes sense, and I appreciate your guys' reasoning and desire to fix this issue. But is it money that they need, or are there other considerations? I just want to make sure it will achieve the desired effect.
Sure, through the chair. This is Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. Member Quinn Davidson, I will rarely turn away money to my own department when the Assembly feels like giving it to me. So short answer is, yeah, I figure we could probably take this and utilize it in the way that the sponsors intend. Much like the previous amendment, I'm just looking at this one for the first time, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all, how it would be used, etc. But short answer is, if you want to shift funds around like this, they probably could be used quite effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
I just wanted to say thank you for that answer.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any further questions on this amendment. Are there any other amendments that maybe didn't get in the formatted and presented for today, but are in idea stage and that will be before us on Tuesday? Like with the November budget, I prefer not to have surprise amendments on the floor. Yes, Ms. Salatel.
I did have a question because I'm not sure if an amendment is required. It's particularly with regard to the health department and contact tracing. As we continue to move forward, as we continue to work into phase 1 of easing, are we sufficiently poised with resources for purposes of adequate contact tracing if we were to, one, lose our wonderful Anchorage School District volunteers, or two, to kind of stand up and create a sustainable contact tracing program for the remainder of the fiscal year if we do not think that it will be borne out by FEMA or other funding sources. Thanks.
Who wants to take that one?
Mr. Chair, this is Chris. I don't think the Anchorage Health Department Director made it on. She's the go-to person for a response to that question, but we will take it back to the AHD team and get a response back to the Assembly shortly.
Great, thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lance.
Yes.
The one thing that we are going to do, the administration will be doing, is we will be preparing an S version for general government and for the municipality, or for general government operating budget and for the general government tax levy. What we did not include in our initial proposal that we gave you last week was the inclusion of the results of Prop 9 to tax for the leasing of the EMS equipment that passed on early April. So originally we did not have that in our proposal. We will need to add that back in. The fire department is working diligently to make sure that those contract efforts can be put in place and that we can implement that later this summer, early this fall. So there will be a small adjustment. Well, there'll be adjustment for the fire department's budget to reflect those additional revenues as a result of that proposition, and then we'll have to adjust the mill rates for general government to include that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other questions, we do have some time, so I will go ahead and see if there are members of the public, and I'll do my best to make sure. Yeah, we have a few phone numbers here, so I'll go through these quickly, and if you're not a member of the public, just let me know. So 501-563-7848. Are you a member of the public, and would you like to speak?
Hi, yes, this is Hannah Lane. I'm a member of the public. I was just observing for research. Thank you.
Thank you. 907-268-5483. Are you a member of the public, and would you like to speak? Okay, then moving on, the 343 numbers are City Hall, and then, yes, thank you, Ms. Allard, for reminding me that 854 is your number. Okay, so that looks like that is it for the public. So please let us know if you have any additional amendments. The sooner that you can get them to us to consider, the better. Otherwise, I think I will go ahead and close this work session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.